because...
You say you know the child's not yours, and yet you also say you got her pregnant on purpose.
Yeah, I got her pregnant on purpose, Your Honest.
You did?
Yes.
Mon Harrison purposefully impregnated you to trap you. You've tried to get a DNA test for months because you know you are not a Nyla's father.
Because we were in love, we were planning to have a baby, but she didn't want to have it. She cheated on me, basically. She cheated on me with another guy. You know she was cheating on you since the beginning of everything, since we've been going together.
I admitted to Mr. Harrison that I had intercourse with another man as we were together, and he still proceeded through my pregnancy and the birth knowing that.
So you admitted that you had had sex with someone else?
Yes, I did.
And he stayed with you?
Yes, because he said he knew that was his child because he purposely did it, and he knows it.
There are moments in life where we believe we are ready for the truth, but the truth itself has a way of transforming everything around it. A DNA test may seem like evidence, just a document or a scientific report, yet in reality, it can become a turning point that reshapes relationships, identity, love, trust, and family forever. In the courtroom of Judge Lauren Lake, where the relationship between law and justice is examined not only in legal terms, but also in emotional reality, the phrase "truth changes everything" becomes more than a saying. It becomes a lived experience, and when DNA test results are opened, people often realize too late that sometimes people regret taking the test because the truth may not fit the story they built their lives around. Here, every testimony matters, every silence speaks, and every memory becomes evidence on the stage of divorce, betrayal, parenthood, and responsibility. Inside the courtroom, there is no grand dramatic scenery, only people whose lives have reached a point where answers must be confronted. Judge Lauren Lake maintains an environment where both law and emotion are recognized. She is known not only for her authority, but for her empathy. She listens, she questions, and she reminds everyone that this court is not only about legal outcomes, but also about accountability, dignity, and healing. In today's case, multiple individuals have arrived with a story that stretches between love, betrayal, suspicion, responsibility, and doubt. This is not simply a disagreement or a misunderstanding. This is something deeper. This is the emotional battlefield where a DNA test stands at the center as the ultimate proof. And the reality is that once the test is requested, the journey can no longer be reversed. There is no going back to the time when belief was enough. The mother steps forward, not with anger alone, but with exhaustion. She explains that this case did not begin in the courtroom. It began long before, in moments of trust shared, plans made, futures imagined. Her experience echoes many voices shared on Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where people talk about regret, healing, and the emotional weight of choices. She believed in a relationship that was meant to hold commitment, partnership, and integrity, but betrayal entered her life, and the emotional wounds that followed brought her here today. She claims that the man she once trusted intentionally fathered her child, believing that this would bind her to him, altering her future. This allegation reflects the complexity of relationships where control, emotional dependence, and misunderstanding can blur what love was supposed to be. She further adds that the result of that pregnancy altered her educational path, her independence, and her plans. She had been preparing for college, shaping a future she envisioned, only to be forced to sacrifice it. On the other side of the courtroom stands the alleged father. He tells a different version of the story. His voice carries defensiveness, confusion, and the lingering influence of rumors. He insists that he has always wanted clarity and has been seeking a DNA test, claiming that the child may not be his. He believes that multiple rumors of infidelity have created doubts that he could not ignore, and therefore, he argues that responsibility cannot be decided without proof. His stance reflects a scenario often discussed in the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where personal relationships and legal obligations intersect in emotionally complicated ways. The mother acknowledges that she had a relationship with another man during the same time period, and this single admission deepens the emotional tension in the courtroom. Judge Lauren Lake does not condemn her, but she emphasizes the importance of self-accountability, reminding everyone that when actions overlap, the consequences may not fall evenly. This is where the concept of justice in jurisprudence becomes meaningful. Justice does not erase emotion, it organizes it within legal reasoning. Alongside the mother stands her own mother, the maternal grandmother of the child. Her presence adds generational experience, emotional depth, and a protective instinct. She has witnessed her daughter struggle, recover, rebuild, and strive toward a future. Her voice reflects not only support for her daughter, but frustration at the circumstances that forced her to take on responsibilities she did not anticipate. The grandmother expresses how she watched dreams become delayed and efforts become burdens. In her words, we hear the emotional and economic cost of unresolved paternity. Meanwhile, the alleged father explains that he comes from a history where he himself grew up without a father, and he fears repeating that cycle. He expresses a desire to be responsible if the child is proven to be his, yet his uncertainty stands as a barrier. His fear is not only about financial responsibility, but emotional attachment. He worries about forming a bond that may break if the test proves otherwise, a situation similar to many DNA test cheating stories shared publicly, where the emotional cost surpasses the legal outcome. Throughout the proceedings, Judge Lauren Lake maintains balance. She asks clear questions, draws attention to inconsistencies, and emphasizes the seriousness of what is at stake, a child's identity and emotional well-being. She highlights that DNA does more than reveal biological truth. It shapes family structure, social responsibility, and psychological belonging. She references situations found even in Supreme Court child support cases, where biological confirmation forces long-term financial and relational consequences. The conversation expands into the Adverse Inference in Evidence Act, where silence, behavior, and refusal to participate can influence legal interpretation. Judge Lauren Lake does not simply look for answers in the DNA result. She looks for intention, emotional accountability, and willingness to repair damage. As the discussion continues, the courtroom is not filled with shouting, but with tension heavy enough to feel. Every sentence spoken is layered with memory, fear, regret, and hope. The mother hopes the truth will validate her struggle. The alleged father hopes the truth will clarify his uncertainty. The grandmother hopes the truth will bring stability for the child. And Judge Lauren Lake hopes the truth, once revealed, will be accepted with maturity. The child, though not present physically, is at the center of every word spoken. The courtroom acknowledges that the child deserves clarity. The child deserves care. The child deserves identity that is not built on confusion or rumor. At this stage of the case, every person waits. And waiting is the most difficult part, because waiting means imagining both possible outcomes, and each outcome carries weight. If the alleged father is confirmed as the biological parent, responsibility begins. If he is not, emotional healing must begin again from a different direction. And in many adoption stories' full episodes, we see how identity and belonging shape the emotional future of a child. The atmosphere is quiet, but not silent. It is the quiet before the truth arrives. As the courtroom discussion deepens, the emotional weight of the situation becomes more visible. Everyone present understands that this is not merely an argument about responsibility, but a confrontation with personal truth. Judge Lauren Lake continues guiding the conversation with firmness and compassion, aware that the decisions made here will echo far beyond the courtroom walls. The mother reflects further on the path that led her here. She remembers the excitement of preparing for college, attending orientation, and imagining a future of independence and progress. She had believed that education would be her way to break away from a difficult past and build something stronger. But her pregnancy changed everything. When she speaks about how she lost the opportunity to attend school, it becomes clear that this is not only about money. It is about time, confidence, and momentum. She explains that motherhood itself was not the burden. The burden was handling motherhood alone. Her claims are not framed to portray herself as perfect or guiltless. She acknowledges her choices, including her involvement with another man, which complicates the question of paternity. But to her, the heartbreak lies in feeling abandoned during a moment of vulnerability. She expresses that emotional abandonment can sometimes be heavier than financial abandonment. Her voice is steady, but the pain is deep. The alleged father listens while struggling to defend his own position. He insists that he was present emotionally and physically, at least in the beginning, and that external influences and rumors undermined his confidence and sense of certainty. His perspective reveals the emotional fragility that accompanies suspicion in intimate relationships. His fear of being misled, used, or manipulated is real to him, and that fear guided his decisions. That does not erase the consequences of his choices, but it helps explain them. This is where Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes the relationship between law and justice. Law looks at facts, timelines, documents, and test results. Justice recognizes the emotional truths that shaped people's decisions. Justice acknowledges that people sometimes act out of fear, misunderstanding, or immaturity. The challenge is to bring those two dimensions together, to ensure that the legal outcome does not dismiss emotional reality, and emotional arguments do not overshadow factual truth. This courtroom environment becomes a space where emotional accountability is not merely suggested, it is required. The grandmother serves as an important voice in this dynamic. She represents stability, experience, and emotional clarity. She is the one who has seen the long-term consequences of unresolved trauma. Her reference to generational cycles is not just symbolic. It is a real psychological pattern that appears often in Celebrate Recovery testimonies and discussions in the Divorce Course podcast, where individuals describe how unresolved emotional wounds repeat themselves through generations. The grandmother fears that history may be repeating itself, where absence of a father figure leaves emotional scars that shape identity and future relationships. Judge Lauren Lake pays attention to this. She understands that the emotional history of a family can influence how people behave in their current relationships. She often discusses that healing is not only about acknowledging harm, but about breaking harmful patterns intentionally. Meanwhile, the alleged father expresses his own upbringing, where he too lacked the presence of a father. This framing creates a mirror between him and the child in question. He understands the loneliness, confusion, and longing that accompanies not knowing who your father is. Yet he also fears being placed in a situation where he becomes another man, living a story not completely based in truth. This internal conflict explains why he simultaneously wants to step forward and hold back. He does not want to emotionally invest in something that may collapse later. This tension is common in DNA test people regret taking situations, where individuals realize that knowing the truth can bring relief, but can also cause emotional destruction. The courtroom becomes a space where each person silently weighs the cost of knowing. The conversation shifts towards how the pregnancy unfolded and how the alleged father responded once suspicions arose. There is discussion about emotional withdrawal, diminished contact, and inconsistent involvement. Judge Lauren Lake highlights the importance of clarity and communication. Regardless of doubt, emotional silence can worsen harm. She reminds both parties that children do not understand adult conflict. They only understand presence or absence. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes that the courtroom does not operate to punish someone for feeling uncertain, but to bring resolution so that uncertainty no longer controls people's lives. This is where the meaning of truth changes everything. Podcast themes becomes relevant. Truth cannot change the past, but it can provide a stable foundation for the future. The conversation then shifts to financial responsibilities. The mother argues that because of the emotional and financial consequences of the pregnancy, she deserves reimbursement for costs that affected her education. This argument touches the legal territory of evidence stage in divorce case discussions, where financial impact and emotional harm must be analyzed carefully. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges the claim, but insists that emotional interpretation cannot replace factual proof. She examines the documentation provided regarding educational expenses, timelines, and decisions made during the pregnancy. This is where the concept of proof becomes critical. The law requires more than memory. It requires documentation that supports claims. The mother's narrative may be emotionally compelling, but the legal system needs evidence of intentional wrongdoing, not only emotional interpretation. This leads Judge Lauren Lake to discuss the Adverse Inference in Evidence Act, where intentions may be interpreted based on actions, communication, or silence. However, this principle cannot apply without clarity. There must be consistency in action and reasoning, and in this case, there are too many overlapping emotional and factual uncertainties. As the judge analyzes both sides' claims, she demonstrates the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice must balance evidence, intent, emotional context, and consequences without bias. Justice must ensure that everyone involved understands not only the legal outcome, but the reasoning behind that outcome. The alleged father then discusses his experience raising another child. He says that he provides financially and emotionally for that child. This detail is not used to portray him as perfect, but to show that he understands fatherhood and responsibility. He is not indifferent to parenting. He is cautious due to emotional trauma. His history reflects a pattern seen in many adoption stories, full episodes, where identity and belonging are deeply tied to emotional memory. The courtroom continues to sit in anticipation. The DNA test has not yet been revealed. The emotional pressure grows. Everyone knows that whatever is said before the results holds temporary meaning. Once the results are opened, emotional narratives must adjust. In this space of collective waiting, Judge Lauren Lake often pauses to reflect on the human reality behind every case. She reminds those present that biological truth does not automatically create emotional truth. Being a parent involves more than DNA. It involves presence, commitment, patience, and accountability. A father can be biological but absent. A non-biological figure can become a father through love. The mother, the alleged father, and the grandmother each carry different fears. The mother fears being left alone emotionally and financially. The alleged father fears being bound to a child who may not be biologically his. The grandmother fears her daughter repeating her own painful emotional journey. Their fears intersect, forming a shared emotional landscape even though their perspectives differ. Judge Lauren Lake prepares to move toward the DNA results. The courtroom becomes still, not because of silence, but because every heart is holding its breath. The DNA test represents clarity, but clarity is often uncomfortable. Once the test is revealed, identity will shift, responsibility will be defined, and emotional narratives must reorganize themselves. The anticipation is the heaviest moment of all. The atmosphere in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom is calm, yet there is a noticeable emotional intensity. The weight of anticipation hangs in the air. Everyone involved knows that what comes next will not simply end a legal question, but will redefine the emotional landscape of several lives. This final stage of the process is where truth steps forward and speculation must step back. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes once again that DNA tests are not meant to destroy families. They are meant to clarify identity, protect the child's emotional future, and establish accountability. Yet she also acknowledges how often people regret taking a DNA test because once the truth enters the picture, illusions cannot survive. Whatever someone believed, hoped, or convinced themselves of begins to dissolve. Only reality remains. The mother sits with a mixture of hope and anxiety. She believes she knows the truth, yet she also remembers the moment when doubt first crept into the relationship. She remembers how her pregnancy changed her future, how financial pressures increased, how emotional expectations were shattered, and how support disappeared. She sees this test as a step toward reclaiming stability. She wants closure. She wants responsibility to be acknowledged and shared. She wants her child to grow up with clarity, not questions. The alleged father sits with internal conflict. He fears the result but needs it. His heart has been divided between wanting to step forward and wanting to protect himself from emotional pain. He has already experienced fatherhood, absence, and loss. The possibility of repeating those experiences frightens him, yet he also recognizes that if the child is his, he must break the cycle that shaped his own childhood. His identity is deeply intertwined with his desire not to become the man who disappeared. He wants to be better than the history that shaped him. The grandmother sits as both witness and guardian. Her emotional presence represents the continuity of family memory. She understands how unresolved relationships affect the development of a child's emotional world. She knows that children who grow up without clarity often struggle with trust, belonging, and self-worth. Her hope is not rooted in winning or losing the case. Her hope is rooted in ensuring that the child does not inherit the same emotional wounds she watched pass through generations. Judge Lauren Lake has overseen countless cases involving paternity, identity, adoption, abandonment, and relational breakdown. She has heard testimonies that parallel those shared in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, stories in the Divorce Course podcast, and legal breakdowns analyzed in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where emotional injury intersects with legal frameworks. Her role here is not to judge character, but to guide these individuals toward truth and accountability. As she prepares to introduce the DNA results, she reminds everyone that what matters most now is how each individual responds to the truth. Evidence determines reality, but emotional maturity determines the future. The DNA report sits before her, a simple envelope, yet heavy with meaning. The courtroom has reached the evidence stage fully, the moment where discussion ends and truth reveals itself. There is a calm before the revelation. Judge Lauren Lake opens the envelope. She reads silently first, as she always does, ensuring she understands the result before announcing it. This moment is deliberate. It is respectful. It acknowledges the gravity of what is about to be spoken. The result confirms that the alleged father is indeed the biological father of the child. This truth arrives with layered emotional consequences. For the mother, there is a moment of validation. The truth supports her experience, her struggle, and her reality. Yet, this validation is not triumphant. It is heavy. It does not erase the hardships she experienced. It does not restore lost educational opportunities. It does not remove emotional pain. It simply confirms that she was not alone in her responsibility, even if she was alone in practice. For the alleged father, the result brings clarity. The uncertainty he carried dissolves. But in its place comes responsibility. He must now step forward, not out of obligation alone, but with genuine commitment. He must now confront the emotional distance he allowed to form during his uncertainty. He must repair the trust that was damaged. He must begin the work of fatherhood without hesitation. For the grandmother, there is relief, but also new responsibility. She recognizes that emotional healing must now begin. The focus must shift from past conflict to building a stable co-parenting structure that prioritizes the child's emotional security and identity. She knows that stability is not automatic. It must be intentionally built. Judge Lauren Lake does not simply state the result and close the case. She provides guidance. She explains that truth changes everything. And now that the truth is known, each person must choose who they will become in response to it. She explains that child support is not a punishment. It is a structure to ensure that the child's needs are met. The case connects to larger legal frameworks, often seen in Supreme Court child support rulings, where the law ensures financial responsibility from both parents. She also emphasizes that emotional presence is just as necessary as financial presence. She reminds them that co-parenting is not defined by the past, but by the willingness of both parents to act with maturity going forward. The child must not become the messenger, the pressure point, or the emotional battleground. The child must become the shared priority. The mother is encouraged to continue her pursuit of personal goals, including educational pathways. Her life is not paused permanently. Her future can still develop. Parenthood does not erase individual purpose. It transforms it. The father is encouraged to rebuild trust through consistent action. Commitment is demonstrated, not declared. He is reminded that children remember who shows up, who listens, and who stays. The grandmother is encouraged to support, but not to take ownership of responsibilities that do not belong to her. Her role is to guide, not to carry the emotional and financial burden alone. The court session concludes not with dramatic reaction, but with a quiet shift. The emotional atmosphere changes. Now that truth is known, the work begins. As the individuals exit the courtroom, their lives do not become suddenly easy. There will be conversations, agreements, disagreements, healing, and gradual progress. The relationship between the law and justice continues beyond the courtroom. Justice is not a moment, it is a process. In the end, the child stands at the center of this story. The child's identity is no longer suspended between uncertainty and speculation. The child has a biological foundation, and from that foundation, emotional structure can now be intentionally built. The case becomes an example of how truth, when confronted honestly, creates the possibility for growth. And though the journey ahead may not be simple, it is now grounded in clarity rather than doubt. This is the conclusion that Judge Lauren Lake strives for, where legal truth, emotional understanding, and personal accountability meet in one place. Not perfect, not painless, but real. And real is where healing begins.